Jiminy Crickets.
Jiminy Cricket is the name. I'm a happy-go-lucky fellow, always getting it wrong for singing my song. A merry old soul am I. Jiminy Cricket is the name. I'll be hanging around this evening. I'll be tipping my hat and telling you that Jiminy Cricket is the name.
Welcome to episode number 94 of Jiminy Crickets. And how are you doing, Ruth?
I'm doing awesome, Chris.
Well, this week we're going to talk about something that is celebrating its 35th anniversary. And it's something that Disney is not really heavily promoting that it's turning 35, but it has something personal to me because I grew up with this, and that would be the Disney Channel, which premiered in April of 1983. So this April is the 35th anniversary of the Disney Channel, and that is what our main topic will be this week. But we're going to talk about the original Disney Channel, meaning the first 5 years, 1983 to 1988. So we're going to flash back to the future and go back to the 80s and talk about what the original Disney Channel was like. We have two perspectives. I was there. I watched the original Disney Channel. And Ruth didn't. So she's looking at it from someone who just recently did research and learned about the original Disney Channel. So we have two completely different perspectives, and I think it'll be very interesting. But before we get to our main topic, here is a very special announcement.
Bon voyage, have a gay holiday, and don't forget to write bon voyage, au revoir, taking all of the sights and moving on those nights.
Traveler's checks?
Traveler's checks.
Credit cards?
Credit cards.
Passport?
Passport.
Baggage tags?
Baggage tags.
Live it up, do it all, happy trip, have a ball, all ashore that's going ashore, bon voyage.
Well, Cricketeers, the Jiminy Crickets podcast is excited to announce an all-new partnership with Concierge Vacation Planners. Concierge is a Disney-only specialty vacation planning service. They don't just book your vacation, they walk beside you through the entire process, from analyzing and picking out the right dates to effectively utilizing your fast passes. They will help you with every detail. The amount of time that your personal vacation planner will spend with you, one-on-one, planning out every stage of your Disney vacation is amazing. Mike and his behind-the-scenes team do a phenomenal job, and we are excited to endorse Concierge for all the Disney travel planning needs of our Jiminy Crickets podcast listeners. So if you are starting the early planning process for your next Disney vacation, be it Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Line, Adventures by Disney, or many of the other Disney locations available, why not give Concierge a call? They are an authorized Disney vacation planner, and here is the amazing part. They charge nothing for their services. You get the exact same pricing as if you called Disney yourself or booked through the Disney online portal. But in using Concierge expertise and concierge level service, you have the added bonus of a personal Disney guru planner by your side. And I can't recommend them enough. You can check them out at www.concierge.com. That's www.concierge.com. like in mouse ears. You can also find them on all the social media platforms and link to them directly from my website, DisneyChris.com. Concierge is now the official Disney vacation planners of the Jiminy Crickets podcast and DisneyChris.com, and we hope you will check them out.
The Disney Channel.
So again, this week we're going to talk about the 35th anniversary of the Disney Channel, and specifically the first 5 years of the Disney Channel, which was very different from the Disney Channel as it is known today. First of all, originally it was a premium channel, like HBO or Cinemax or Showtime. You had to pay an extra amount in order to become a subscriber and get the Disney Channel. It did not come as part of your cable package like it does today. That didn't happen until the late 80s, early 90s, when it started to transition into that. So this period was a period where a lot of people didn't have the Disney Channel. You only had it if you were a subscriber. And the content on the Disney Channel was very, very different. And we're going to talk about a lot of the original programming that aired on the Disney Channel during that 5-year period, and I will share some of my personal memories of these shows and a few facts and figures. So it'll be a little bit of edutainment. And the Disney Channel was very edutainment focused in its earlier years, as you will find out. But the origins of the Disney Channel go all the way back to the mid-70s, specifically 1977, when a gentleman known as Jim Jamiro thought up the idea of having a Disney cable network. However, it was not the right time for this to happen. They did show a few specials on HBO. I know there was a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs special that aired on HBO in the early 80s, and this was sort of a testing ground to see how people would respond to original Disney content on cable television, and that was a moderate success. So the time did not arrive until 1983, and part of what happened was the Disney Weekly series, which had been on the air since 1954, was losing its audience. And so Disney decided to just kind of scrap the idea of dealing with a network and becoming its own network and showing its own programming. And that was right around the time when they canceled the long-running Disney anthology series. So it was a transition from the weekly network primetime Sunday night series we all know as The Wonderful World of Disney, even though it had about 12 names over the years, but that's kind of the name it's most known as. And eventually it transitioned over to the Disney Channel. What's interesting is you can actually watch the broadcast premiere of the Disney Channel. There's a video like a 2-minute video on, you can find it on YouTube with Donny Osmond. And he's doing a countdown to when the Disney Channel was going to go on the air. It has all the characters, and Mickey flips the switch, and then the Disney Channel went on the air.
In the months ahead, you'll see more great movies for the whole family, more new shows that are fun to watch, easy on the eyes, and packed with the things that you want to know. The people at the Disney Channel want you to know that that's a promise, a commitment to bringing you and your family the kind of quality television you'll be glad to welcome into your home.
All personnel, 1 minute to Disney Channel programming. Donnie, will you start the audible countdown, please?
Well, you want me to start the countdown? Jeez, this is an honor. Okay, we all set? All systems ready to go? Okay, you ready to roll programs in there? Great, okay, here we go. Mickey Mouse, Earth Station Mickey, stand by to commence countdown.
Mouse Control, this is Earth Station Mickey. You are cleared to commence countdown, Donnie.
Here we go. Ready? 30.
29.
28.
27.
26.
25.
24. 23.
22. 21. 20.
19.
18.
17.
15.
13. 12.
11.
10.
9.
8. 7.
The Disney Channel is on the air.
And I believe the first show that they showed was a cartoon program. They showed old cartoons called Good Morning Mickey, and we'll get into that and discuss exactly what that show was about. But just that was the first show that aired on the Disney Channel. So the Disney Channel was originally, as I said, a subscriber-only network. So they didn't depend on ratings. They depended on subscribership, so they weren't appealing to advertisers or things like that. They were appealing to their subscribers, which allows them to produce a lot more focused content than they do today. It was more Disney, in other words, because the people subscribing to the Disney Channel back then were people who wanted Disney programming, and that was what they were coming for, and that was what they were paying out the money, the big bucks for. They wanted Disney family-friendly type entertainment, what has become expected from the Disney name. So in the early years, about 65% of the programming was taken right out of the Disney library of content, and they had a vast library going all the way back to the 20s of animated shorts, television dramas like Davy Crockett and Zorro and all the old original Mickey Mouse Club shows, all the Walt Disney anthology shows, all of the live-action comedies and movies, and all of that type of content was shown regularly on the Disney Channel, and that made up about 65% of the content. But about 45% was original programming. We're going to get into some of that original programming and talk about it. But just remember that this isn't all that the Disney Channel was about in its early years. It really was about what we know today as Walt Disney. Walt Disney came along in the 90s, but originally the Disney Channel was Walt Disney all the time, 24 hours a day. Well, the other thing that's interesting is originally cable networks were not 24-hour like they are now. They would, the Disney Channel aired from about 7 in the morning till about 2 in the morning, 2 at night, which is the morning, 2 a.m. And then it would go off the air for several hours. This was common in the 80s for cable stations to do that.
The Disney Channel wishes you a wonderful tomorrow. And remember, you always have a place to turn to. Your family place. The Disney Channel. And now, good night.
So it wasn't until much later that they became 24-hour. So anyway, Ruth has compiled a list of the best of, and we're going to talk about the best regular series. Then we're going to talk about specials, and we're going to wrap it up by talking about some of the best original movies that were made for the Disney Channel. And we're talking about the years 1983 up to 1988. And we decided to end it there because 1989 was really the beginning of the modern era of the Disney Channel, because things really started to change at that point. That's when the new Mickey Mouse Club came on, and it started to transition into what we know today as the Disney Channel, with all the teenage, tweenage stuff That's So Raven and Hannah Montana.
Yeah.
And
Lizzie McGuire.
Lizzie McGuire, all that stuff started happening at that point. So this is pre-New Mickey Mouse Club, pre-Britney. So, Ruth, you are the gatekeeper this week. You have the list. You're going to read off the names of the shows that we decided were the most important to talk about. Ruth is going to describe them. And because I watched these shows when they first aired, most of them, not all of them. Some of them they weren't things like... I'll explain which shows I enjoyed and which ones I didn't and why. But we're just going to kind of go through all of these original shows. And Ruth has gone through and watched a lot of them in our research. We did a lot of research for this one. And so Ruth is familiar with all these shows, so she has a few things to say as a first-time viewer. And I have a lot to say as a remembering, walk down memory lane viewer. So it'll be a completely different perspective between the two of us. So Ruth, what's the first show we're going to talk about?
The first show is The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet.
The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, starring the entire Nelson family. Here's Ozzie. Here's Harriet. Here's David. Here's Rick. Here they are, America's favorite family, the Nelsons.
And this was actually reruns of the original show that started in the 50s. So go ahead and talk about how you experienced this show, Chris.
Well, I used to watch Father Knows Best on the, I think it was CBN, was one of the cable stations, and they showed a lot of family comedies from the 50s and stuff. But I had never seen Ozzie and Harriet until they started airing it on the Disney Channel. I'd seen Leave It to Beaver, I'd seen Father Knows Best, I Love Lucy, but the Disney Channel was my first introduction to The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. What's interesting about that is they aired on the same network that the Disneyland television show aired, which was ABC. And they were one of the biggest shows on ABC at the same time that Disneyland was one of the biggest shows on ABC. And Ozzie and Harriet actually did a few appearances at Disneyland for different promotional events. I know they were involved in the Kodak Presents Disneyland 59. They were on that special for Disney when they premiered the Matterhorn and the monorail and the submarines. So they had a connection with Disney early on, and they knew that family knew Walt Disney personally. So it's interesting that when the Disney Channel came along, that they decided to bring back the series and show reruns. But they didn't just show the reruns. They actually filmed introductions with Harriet Nelson, Ricky Nelson, and David Nelson. Ozzie had passed away by 83. But they had little tags at the beginning of each showing of a rerun where they talked about, like Harriet would say, this was one of my favorite episodes. Me and Ozzie were doing this, and the kids were young. You know, they kind of bring you into it, like what was going on in their minds at the time. And then they would show the episode. And then they had a special, brand new montage at the beginning of the episode where they'd show all sorts of different scenes. And it was called The Best of Ozzie and Harriet. So it was kind of a compilation series. And it was really heavily promoted. And it was one of the big things about the Disney Channel in the early years. Even though it wasn't original Disney content, it was really big for the Disney Channel because they brought back the series that people loved and hadn't seen for many years. And I really loved that show. I still do. I'll go on and watch the reruns. I don't know. It's total nostalgia. And it's just, I love, the thing I love the most about it is Harriet's dry humor. Because Ozzie is just this wacky guy, and Harriet is just down to earth, and she always has a smart remark that she says to Ozzie when he's going through all his craziness. And I just love that dynamic. And the fact that they were a real family, makes it so much more interesting and entertaining. And then as the show went on, the sons got married and their actual wives were on the show. I mean, it was crazy. The show was on for like 20 years. And it's so forgotten nowadays, but back in the 50s and 60s, this show was huge. It's one of the biggest shows on TV at that time. But people don't even... most people that are probably in their 20s and 30s have never even heard of it. But I heard of it because I was, heavily saturated in it on the Disney Channel when I was a kid. Do you remember watching that show?
I actually don't remember watching that show, but I mean, I'm glad that they put it on the Disney Channel to expose it to like another generation of TV watchers.
Yeah, and Disney Channel did a lot of that. And this was before Nickelodeon started doing that.
Yeah, before Nick at Night.
Before all that. So this really I feel that this kind of led to that whole trend of introducing new generations to these old shows that kind of led to the whole Nickelodeon. Because at first they did it on the regular Nickelodeon. Because they weren't a 24-hour network either. The whole thing with the Nick at Night was that was when they became a 24-hour network. Because they ended the children's programming at a certain point, and then they transitioned to Nick at Night. And that kind of was where they really put on all those old shows.
Right.
We could go and I could do a whole episode, if this weren't a Disney podcast, I could do a whole episode about the original Nick at Night, because that's another thing I loved. The old school Nick at Night was amazing. Not like it is now. But anyway, yeah, Ozzie and Harriet, amazing show. I loved Ozzie and Harriet. Even though it's not Disney, I think of it as Disney just because I was introduced to it on the Disney Channel.
Right.
So what's the next one on our list?
The next show is called Coming On, and this was a variety series hosted by Jimmy Alec. And what it was is they traveled to different college campuses, and they kind of just had people that went to the college perform and do different, acts, singing, juggling, comedians and things like that.
Right. It was like a talent show, and they just went around the country and had different colleges perform, bring out their talent. I never watched this show, but apparently, how many episodes did it have? It had several episodes. Like 26 episodes?
24.
24 episodes? I think the thing is that when I was watching the Disney Channel in the early years, there were certain things that appealed to me and certain things that didn't. So I would flip the channel to something else. This was more geared towards older, like young adults. So I really had no interest in it as a kid. I did watch a promo for it the other day. It looks interesting, but it definitely looks dated. It looks very early 80s. It's like, I think Disney, a lot of these early shows were Disney trying to fill time as easily as they possibly could, and they were just kind of throwing out ideas and seeing what stuck to the wall. And I think this is an example of that. There's a few others we'll mention. There's nothing all that notable about this program, but the only real notable thing is it's one of the earliest Disney Channel shows, so I thought we should mention it. It also has a really cheesy theme song.
Bringing you the best talent from college campuses all over America, it's Coming On.
We're singing a song girl. Look out, we're coming on.
So what's the next one, Ruth?
The next one is Contraption. And this was hosted by Ralph Harris, and it was actually probably one of the first children's game shows on TV. And they would ask the kids to answer trivia questions. They would show them clips of Disney movies and then ask them questions about the Disney movies. Mm-hmm. And then they would earn contraptiles. Mm-hmm. And the winner had the most contraptiles at the end.
Right. They split up. See, this was before Double Dare and all the slime shows on Nickelodeon. You have to remember, this predated Nickelodeon's whole deal. So this was very innovative. And this reminds me a lot of, if you remember the show Double Dare from Nickelodeon. Mm-hmm. And they had, like, between each round of questions, they had like a race where you got on the silly, like, one of them was a flying carpet and you spun the wheels to make it move, and they basically had a race and you got an extra contraptile if you won the race between each round. It was a team. They had 2 teams and 4 different categories, and then they'd show a clip of a Disney movie, like Ruth said, and then they would ask questions based on the clip they had just watched. And the kids on there were really young. A lot of times it was very cringy. They would, because they kind of had, at the beginning of the show, they kind of had a pre-written script of how they would introduce themselves. It's very obvious that it was all planned ahead. It wasn't very impromptu, but you can totally tell that the kids are like, they kind of told the producers what their interests are, and then the producers sort of wrote down how they want them to say it, and it was just very cringy. Like, hi, I like to ice skate.
I have a pet snake. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see, I think there's only one episode on YouTube of this, but it is a full episode. I think it's split up into 4 parts. It's a half-hour show split up into 4 parts. But anyway, I really enjoyed this as a kid because it kind of made me think of Disneyland, like the parks, just because they had, like, the segments between, looked like one of them was a jungle boat, like at Disneyland, and you got to see clips from different Disney movies, which I also enjoyed. Because remember, this is before, you know, they had VHS, but you had to go rent one, and you didn't have, like, access to YouTube back then, so to get to see a little clip of Bedknobs and Broomsticks was a big deal back then, you know. It was to see that on TV, so I enjoyed it. I enjoyed just the scenery and everything. The contraptiles were odd looking. They were like yellow plastic squares, kind of creepy looking. I don't know. It looked like it had Vaseline all over it or something. But anyway, I enjoyed that one. That was a good one.
The next one is Disney's Legends and Heroes, and this was kind of like an umbrella series where they played old shows from the original anthology series, such as Gallagher, Texas John Slaughter, Zorro, and so we just want to mention that kind of to go back on what Chris was saying, where they showed all of these old episodes that used to be on The Wonderful World of Color and things like that.
Right, so this series was drawing from Disney's catalog of Old West type material, or things like, you know, different mini-series that were shown on the anthology series over the years. So Davy Crockett would have been featured. They also showed episodes of Zorro, which was not part of the anthology series, but was produced at the same time. So that type of programming. And they had a lot to draw from because they produced a lot of those type of shows in the late 50s, early 60s. So they just kind of made a whole umbrella, and they made a new introductory segment, you know, like with a song and credits and everything to introduce. And these type of shows would continue to be shown on the Disney Channel over these 5 years and even beyond that. I know they had a Saturday morning drive-in thing that they did, like in the early 90s, which showed the same type of programming on there. But this was the original umbrella for those types of shows. And it just like, they took away that name, Heroes and Legends, but they kept showing this content on a recurring basis over the years. So it's a really important part of what the early Disney Channel was, so it was worth bringing up. Even though it's not an original series per se, but it's important to the history.
Definitely. So the next one is also another umbrella series, and it's called Disney Studio Showcase. And this showed actually original Disney specials. They had about 20 episodes, but there's 2 specials in particular that we want to talk about that aired under this Disney Studio Showcase.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is from 1983. It's Hansel and Gretel and Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
And this was actually 2 short films produced by Tim Burton that were played on here, and they were pretty interesting.
So Vincent is an animated claymation short, and black and white, and it's got the same character that is in the film Frankenweenie, the short film from the 80s that became a full-length film and recently, a couple years ago. But it's the same character, and he thinks he's Vincent Price. And it's kind of a dark comedy. You know, it's Tim Burton. It's one of his early things, so it's definitely got that macabre feel to it that you come to know. You know, it's got that same touch to it. And this was, I think, like a 7-minute short. And then the main feature was a 30-minute retelling of Hansel and Gretel, done only as Tim Burton can. This was controversial, I believe, at the time it was aired, and Disney only aired it once because it was just so wacky and just so out of character for Disney that they just didn't know what to do with it. It didn't fit the Disney model, so they showed it once and kind of hid it. And it was hidden away for years, and only recently has it been released on YouTube by somebody who probably videotaped it back when it first aired. For years, it was kind of a mystery what this Hansel and Gretel was all about, because a lot of people hadn't seen it, but only heard about it. It was kind of notorious. So, it's like it takes place in what seems to be, you know, the typical European fairy tale type setting, but all of the characters are Japanese. All the actors are Japanese. And the woman who plays the witch also plays Hansel and Gretel's mother, I think stepmother.
Yeah.
And it's a male actor in drag, which is interesting for a 80s Disney show.
Mm-hmm.
And then just some of the things she did were very cruel and mean and just not very happy, skippy fairy tale type stuff. And, you know, a lot of the imagery is very creepy and frightening and not very kid-friendly, I feel. It's got a lot of the famous Tim Burton tropes like striped stockings and, you know, the black and white stripes and different design elements that you know of, like some of the father is a toy maker, I believe, and some of the toys that he creates definitely have that Tim Burton look to them.
Yes.
It's just basically, you know, the story of Hansel and Gretel, but told through the eyes of Tim Burton. It's definitely, there's no mistaking that this is a Tim Burton thing.
Definitely not.
Yeah, what were your feelings about it?
It was creepy.
Yeah.
I would not show this to my child.
Yeah.
I was creeped out watching it as an adult.
Yeah, it's pretty strange.
I mean, there's part of it where, you know, obviously we all know that the Wicked Witch dies, and how they show it, they throw paint on the wall, and it's supposed to be like blood, and it is pretty, like, lifelike, even though it's not red.
Yeah.
It's still, you know what that's supposed to be like.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy. The whole witch house, the things that happen, the imagery in the candy house is pretty creepy. And the man that plays the witch and the mother is horrifying.
Oh my gosh, definitely. Definitely. If you like Tim Burton, you definitely have to see this because you can tell it's Tim Burton, like 100%.
It's definitely an important thing if you're learning about Tim Burton. It's an important chapter because it definitely is his early work and it shows how his work would evolve.
Right. Yeah. A lot of imagery kind of reminded me of Beetlejuice, too.
Yeah. And this is only a few years before Beetlejuice, so...
Right.
So what's the next special, Ruth?
The other special that we wanted to highlight from the Disney Studio Showcase is called Where the Toys Come From. And this is kind of like a... they actually take actual toys and kind of turn them into live action. They become alive, and they kind of tell the story of they're wondering where they came from. And so they kind of start talking to different people, and they end up in like a toy factory and they find out how they came to life inside somebody's mind, how they were, thought of, imagined, and then designed, and then into the actual toy.
Right. They show the production line of how they're manufactured. Yeah, so it's like these wind-up toys. One is has glasses, and the other one has a magnifying glass, and they have cute little cartoon eyes, and they just walk around, and they're wondering where they come from, and they ask their little girl who's able to communicate with them, and she doesn't know, but she says you might want to go to the antique toy museum and ask the antique toys because they might know. So they sneak out and they wind up in this toy museum. Apparently, watching the credits, the toys they used in this were provided by Ward Kimball.
Oh, cool.
It was from his personal collection. So these antique toys, specifically this little puzzle of a man that you can switch around his facial features, he explains to them that they come from a factory and to look on their back end. And so they look on their back end, it says made in Japan. So one thing that's a little crazy is they're able to think backwards and go back in time to go back to end up in and everything is like the airplane that they're on goes backwards. It's a little bizarre how they that plot convenience that they created for this. But they end up in the factory in Japan, and the person who actually created them is able to talk to them, and he ends up taking them around the toy factory and showing them exactly how he drew them from his imagination, how they took his drawings and created them as a prototype, and then into the factory where they mass-produced the toys. And it's actually, again, definitely edutainment, because it's really teaching little kids about where how toys are made. Mm-hmm. So it's teaching something, but it's doing it in a way that's entertaining at the same time. And I remember this was shown on the Disney Channel on a constant rotation over and over. Like, this was shown for years over and over and over again. And I believe it won some awards or something. I don't know for sure, but it was something that was critically acclaimed. I do know that. So that was a big deal for the Disney Channel in its early years. Something they were known for. I know it even was released on video because it was so... Disney thought enough of it that they made a home video release of it.
Yeah. So next we move on to a show called Donald Duck Presents.
Stories and fun, Donald Duck presents music and laughter.
was a regular show where they showed different animated shorts.
Yeah, it was a focus on the Donald Duck shorts, but they did show others as well. They just a repackaging of all the old theatrical shorts from the 40s and 50s, and they had a new theme song introduction, and they had little tags between each cartoon. It was a half hour, so they usually showed about 3 to 4 cartoons per episode. It was shown basically every afternoon about when kids would be coming home from school. I think it was on around 3 o'clock in the afternoon typically. And it was on for years, and eventually it became a show called Quack Attack, which was basically the exact same show but with a different theme song, but they showed the exact same cartoons and everything. So it was on for a long time. It was one of the staples of early Disney Channel for sure.
And now we talk about another one, which is called Epcot Magazine. And this was kind of like a magazine show where they had a variety of topics that they talked about, but they did like little introductions and things, and they actually filmed them at Epcot Center.
Right. It was kind of like Entertainment Tonight type of show, but it wasn't entertainment. It was just kind of packaged that way. Like the 80s, like 7:30 news magazine daily shows that they used to have on syndication. Like PM Magazine, I think, was one from the 80s, where they would just show different news stories and, light fare, nothing heavy. Eventually it evolved into like the more like controversial topics, like not the Disney, I'm talking about those syndicated, like they had A Current Affair, and they would talk about scandals and things. But this was sort of that type of thing, but it was all like family friendly stuff, and it wasn't really focused on news as much as it was focused on human interest type stories, like this man is able to make balloons or something, just just different interesting things about people, all usually definitely positive things. Nothing, they didn't talk about war or famine or anything like that. But it was all sort of a tie-in to Epcot Center, which was brand new at that time. It was only a year old, less than a year old, when the Disney Channel launched. And one of the things I remember being a feature on this show was a thing that was in Epcot Center where they took polls. It was an attraction in Epcot Center. We talked about it on our Epcot anniversary show a few months ago, where I think it was called the Epcot Forum or something like that.
Was it at Future Choice Theater?
Future Choice Theater, yeah. And they had a selector, and they would show you different things on the screen, and you would answer the questions, like choose A if you feel this way, choose B if you feel that way. They would take that data and they would share it on that Epcot Magazine show as a segment. So the surveys that they took in the park were used as part of the show. I do remember that, which was interesting that they did that. And it was just, I think it was on for a couple years, and it was just, it was a daily show. And what was really fun about it is, all the segments were filmed in the park. So they'd show all the different beautiful scenes of early Epcot as they would go around. And sometimes they would tie in the segment to something in Epcot. And sometimes they would actually feature an attraction in Epcot and talk about that. So it was interesting.
Sounds like it. I wish I could have watched it. So the next one we're going to talk about is actually an original live-action series that they created for the Disney Channel, and it's called 5 Mile Creek. And this is set in Australia during Australia's gold rush. And it's kind of focusing around the different types of stagecoach lines and things like that, and like a family, and so there's obviously different people that you are meeting in this this series of shows.
Yeah.
But did you watch this, Chris?
I did not at the time because I wasn't interested. It seemed boring to me as a kid. It was more geared towards adults, this particular show. It reminds me a lot of Little House on the Prairie, which I actually did like as a kid, so it's surprising I didn't like this one, but I have seen some of it as an adult, and it's actually very good. It's almost, if you blink, you wouldn't know it's Australia. It seems more like the Old West in America.
Yeah.
With just little subtle things remind you here and there that it's Australia. Some of the people have accents. Some of them don't. Some of them are Americans living in Australia, which is even more confusing. Because they have American accents. So, and yeah, it's kind of focused on a stage line, and just all the people who own it, who work around the town that the stage line goes through. And it's also interesting because I was watching an episode of it earlier today, and the character said, this is one of the examples of how subtle reminders you're in Australia. She's like, I'm writing to you on this November day. Spring is in the air. I'm like, November?
Right.
Oh, yeah. In Australia,
Right.
November's in the spring. So I was like, okay. So, yeah. But yeah, that show was on for several years. It was really popular. It was one of Disney Channel's really early hits. Because it was more for adults, so I guess adults were into it, and you could watch it with the kids together, one of those type deals. But I feel that it was something that I underappreciated as a little boy, because I just saw the look of it and kind of decided I didn't like it without giving it a shot. So I kind of missed out on it. I thought, oh, this is boring. It's just a bunch of adults talking. So I didn't have any interest in it. But going back and watching it as an adult, it's actually, the acting is great, and it's good stories, and it reminds me a lot of Little House on the Prairie or the Waltons, that type of thing, which I enjoy those shows too. But I don't understand why I enjoyed those as a kid, but I didn't like this one. I don't know. Maybe I just like the theme song better in the Prairie.
So one of the shows you already mentioned, the next one we're going to talk about is Good Morning Mickey.
Wake up, it's a wonderful morning. We're off on a wonderful day. Good morning and good morning, Mickey. We're gonna get up and on our way, 'cause the sun is a wonderful yellow. The sky is a beautiful blue. Good morning and good morning, Mickey. We got so much to do. Now the sun is up, everyone is up. It's the sun, so let's rise and shine. Whistle, blow, whistle, let's get going, 'cause this great day is yours and mine. Today's gonna be great, we got the world on a plate. Can't wait to start the day. Bells are ringing and birds are singing, and we can hear the whole world say, hooray! For a wonderful morning, let's get this show underway. Good morning and good morning, Mickey. It's gonna be a great, yes, it'll be a great, it's gonna be a great day.
And this was also a series that showed the classic animated shorts from the Disney collection.
Right, this was the morning equivalent to Donald Duck Presents. They were basically the same exact show. They just, like, the morning Good Morning one had a different theme song and different segments in between the shorts tying it together. And they focused more on Mickey Mouse shorts, obviously, and the other one focused more on Donald Duck shorts. But, I mean, it wasn't exclusive to that. They would show a Donald Duck short on Good Morning Mickey. They would show a Mickey Mouse short on Donald Duck Presents. They'd show Silly Symphonies on these. So it wasn't just Donald Duck or Mickey cartoons. It was basically their whole library of short subject cartoons from the early years were shown on this. And this is really, these two programs were how I was first introduced to a lot of these. Because, you know, before the Disney Channel, you got to watch Disney once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't show these cartoons on a constant rotation. I do know that a lot of times before Disney Channel, they would show Disney movies on HBO. And we had HBO early on too. And when they showed like a Disney movie, they would create a whole package with it, and they would show a couple of shorts with the movie. So like when they showed Return from Witch Mountain, I think that one of the shorts that was included in the package was the Nifty 90s and then How to Swim with Goofy. Because I remember watching those with Return from Witch Mountain. And every time they showed Return from Witch Mountain on HBO, they also showed those two shorts. But that was a rare thing to get to see one of those shorts. They weren't shown on a daily basis, like, you know, because when I was younger, they were showing Tom and Jerry on TV on a daily basis. They were showing Yogi Bear and all those others, but Disney was never shown on network TV like that during the day.
Yeah.
Popeye was always on, you know, all the other things except for Disney were highly available to me as a kid. It wasn't until the Disney Channel that I was able to see all the Disney stuff, which was really special. So, I loved Good Morning Mickey, and I used to start, my mornings always started as a kid, because it came on at 6 o'clock, and then I would watch, I think the original Mickey Mouse Club came on for a half hour at 6 o'clock, and then Good Morning Mickey was on at 6:30. And every morning I'd be up watching that before school. It was a big part of my childhood, watching those two things.
That leads right into the next one, because I have the original Mickey Mouse Club on the list.
Yeah.
We definitely have to mention that, even though it's not made for the Disney Channel. Again, just like the other anthology movies or series that we discussed earlier, they showed old Mickey Mouse Club episodes that definitely, you know, they're exposing it to a new generation of people.
Right, and these weren't... See, the original Mickey Mouse Club was an hour, and then they syndicated the show in the 60s, and they cut down the episodes to half-hour shows. And that was what they showed on the Disney Channel. They never showed the full hour Mickey Mouse Club. They showed the half-hour syndicated version, which included all the old original stuff, but it was just repackaged in the 60s. And that's what they were showing on the Disney Channel, was the half-hour format. But it included a lot of the, you know, great stuff. It had Spin and Marty, you know, all the serials you'd see, and the, our theme song for when we do the news, the Mickey Mouse newsreel was on there, the Mickey Mouse Club newsreel.
Mm-hmm.
And, they would show, again, some of the shorts, but in black and white, because it was from a black and white TV show, because it was the mouse cartoon. They'd come out and do Miska, Muska, Mouseketeer, mouse cartoon time, now is here. So, I mean, I wasn't alive in the 50s. I didn't get a chance to see these shows when they were new, so this was my exposure to the original Mickey Mouse Club. And it was really special to be able to see that, because it's something they never showed on TV before this time. I mean, it hadn't been shown on television since the 60s, so I never got a chance to see it until I watched it on the Disney Channel.
Now, we'll move to another original series that was created for the Disney Channel called Mousercise.
Hi, Musketeers! Hi, Mickey! Let's Mousercise!
Come on, everybody, and Mousercise. Let the music move you till you carry away. Keep your body moving till your spirit's right. Do it every night and day. You can jump, you can shake it, anything you make it, whatever you feel is right. Come on, everybody, and Mousercise. Mickey's Mousercise.
And this was an exercise show for kids, and it was based on the Disney record also titled Mousercise.
Right, so in the early 80s, for those who weren't around back then, and for those who forget, the whole exercise aerobic thing was huge, and the whole thing that kicked it off was a thing called the Jane Fonda Workout, which was a video that you could buy, and it was the first of its kind, and it was a huge success. I mean, Jane Fonda made millions from this. And it was just basically her wearing a very 80s looking leotard and doing exercises, and then you would just follow her instructions and do her she just did her normal exercise routine. So if you wanted a body like Jane Fonda, you would follow her tips. And this set off a whole craze in the early 80s. Olivia Newton-John did a song, Let's Get Physical. It was just this whole fad in the early 80s. And Mousercise was kind of a Disney's answer to that fad, because the main lady that hosted the show was dressed exactly like Jane Fonda, even though she was blonde. I think her name was Kellen.
Yeah, Kellen.
And what's fun about it is it was all little kids doing the exercises. So it was an exercise show for kids. And it focused a lot on proper warming up and stretching and making sure. And then at the end, they always did a cool down. And they had a song for the cool down. It was like, cool down, cool down. And then they always had like this segment in the middle of the show where they had this young guy. And he was like in the kitchen, and he would do like a comedy skit with Goofy, the costume characters, Goofy, Mickey, Donald. And they were all dressed in their exercise clothes, which was cute. And they'd do some sort of skit based on nutrition, good eating habits, and things like that. And it was always Goofy was like always doing the wrong thing, and he had to straighten Goofy out and teach him the right way. And then they always included a featured song where they would play a song from the album Mousercise, and whenever they did the featured song, one or two of the costume characters would come out and join in and do the exercises with the kids. Whenever they did Ducks Dance 2 from Mousercise, Donald would come out and join. So they always did that. And then for the most of the show, the costume characters were not there because, I mean, these are people in costumes doing exercises. That's kind of crazy to expect them to do that. It's a little
You
much.
can sweat off some pounds in there.
Yeah, that's true, yes. So yeah, that was something I always watched too. And I actually just watched it. I didn't do the exercises. I never once got off my butt and joined in. I just watched the show because it was interesting.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
I actually had the album.
I had it too, yeah.
The album came with a book, and it actually had exercises for each song.
Right.
So you didn't have to watch the show to do exercises. So me and my brother and sister, we put this album on, and we would do the exercises in the book, and it was really fun. So I know if I was watching this show in '83, I would have definitely been doing exercises along with those kids. So
yeah, I was just like, nobody's watching. I'm not gonna do it.
So the next one is Masterpiece Theater. And this was kind of like a spoof on the PBS show Masterpiece Theater, which my parents would watch, would send me off to bed when this show was starting.
Yeah.
But so George Plimpton is the host of Masterpiece Theater, and he's kind of acting like Alistair Cook from Masterpiece Theater.
Yeah.
And so he would kind of dryly introduce different Disney
he
cartoons.
got very philosophical about the goof.
Yes.
And the dawn of Duck. He was just it was very funny. He did it, he played it very straight too. Like he took it was done very seriously, but that was why it was funny. They just got into like deep psychological analysis of what these crazy shorts were. They just showed like a collection of Disney shorts And it was shown later in the evening, probably a little after dinner. So this was more for adults to watch, but kids could enjoy it too. But the introduction to it, they play the exact same music that they played in Masterpiece Theater, and they scanned over the library with different things. But then, like, amongst all these, like, ancient relics and dusty old books, there'd be, like, a Mickey Mouse comic book or, a pair of mouse ears, and they'd be playing this serious music. And then George Plimpton would be sitting in his big leather armchair and describing these cartoons. It was really funny. They only made a few of them, but they showed them constantly, like in reruns. Like they made probably 20 or so original ones, and then they just, over the years on the Disney Channel, they were constantly repeating them over and over and over again. So I saw that show quite a bit, and I always enjoyed it. I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
And again, another chance to see the classic shorts.
Yeah, definitely.
They did a lot of the goofy ones, the how-to shorts on there, and he would talk a lot about how Goofy was like the everyman. Goofy is the and the funny thing is he sounded just like the narrator on the how-to Goofy shorts.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So the next series is an original series for Disney Channel, kind of to harken back to the True Life Adventures, and it was called New Animal World. And, they just featured different animals and, like live clips of them, things like that.
Just hearkening again back to a genre that Disney started. If you think about it, before Disney came along and started doing the True Life Adventures, documentaries about nature were not a thing yet. There would be no Animal Channel today had it not been for Walt Disney. He basically created this genre in filmmaking. So it's apt that they would have a program focused on wildlife, and it was definitely done in the same vein as the True Life series. But it was more serious because a lot of the times the True Life Adventures would get a little comical, and they'd do funny music, and they'd try to make the animals more human-like in their descriptions of them, which is something I enjoy and I love about the True Life Adventures. I'm not putting it down. A lot of people do put it down because of that, but not me. I'm just saying that this series was a little bit more accurate to the real world of nature, than the original True Life Adventures were. There were no cockroaches doing square dances, in other words. And there was no, concerto of bullfrogs happening.
That happens in real life, Chris.
I know, but they don't usually play, classical music as a backdrop.
Yes, they do.
Oh, okay.
So the next series is called The Scheme of Things, and this was a series that examined the world of science. actually watched an episode on YouTube, and it was really interesting. And they were talking about like alternative forms of energy way back in 1983. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it was, again, I feel like this show is really tied into the whole mission of Epcot Center.
Mm-hmm.
It was really kind of a side effect of the whole Epcot Center thing that Disney was dealing with in that time period. And a lot of the ideas and concepts behind Epcot found its way onto this program, even though it never mentioned Epcot specifically by name or by visuals. It was definitely, to me, everything they talk about has a tie-in to something that you would find in Epcot. So that's one of the reasons I really enjoyed the show, because I always felt like this was sort of an appendix to Epcot in a way. And even watching some of these old Scheme of Things shows today, they're very informative, and some of the information might be outdated, because computers have changed a lot in 35 years and things like that, but a lot of the information is still relevant, like energy, conservation, and things they were talking about then. And it's very entertaining. Now, I have to say that when I was 10 years old, I wasn't that entertained by it. But as an adult, I can go back and enjoy it. I did watch it a few times as a kid, but it wasn't like my go-to program on the Disney Channel when I was 10 years old, I have to admit.
Yeah. I think the next one was your go-to program, and it's Welcome to Pooh Corner.
Yeah.
Welcome to you.
And how do you do?
Everybody's waiting here at Pooh Corner, waiting for you and Winnie the Pooh to have a happy hoopty-poo time.
Gloomy old Eeyore nods his head. He worries away the time.
Thanks for noticing me. Owl makes his speeches long and loud without any reason or rhyme.
And I remember my Aunt Matilda on my uncle's side. My Uncle Orville, that is, who often said to me,
While Rabbit is busy pulling weeds, his carrots grow tall and sweet.
Kanga is baking pies and cakes that Little Roo's waiting to eat.
And Piglet, forever cleaning house, is doing his daily sweep.
What a mess. Tigger keeps bouncing up and down, perfecting his Tiggerly leap.
Say, this is Tiggerific!
And here comes Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh, tubby little cubby all stuffed with fluff. He's Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, willy-nilly silly old bear.
Well, welcome to you. I'm Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie.
Everybody's waiting here at Pooh Corner, waiting for you and me, Winnie the Pooh, to have a happy hoopty-poo time. Let's have a happy hoopty-poo time.
So this was a show obviously about Winnie the Pooh and his friends, and they had sophisticated costumes that actually used a system called puppetronics.
Yeah.
So there was performers inside the costume, and it allowed them to, have control over the facial features and things like that.
Right. It was kind of a combination of animatronics and puppeteering. That's where they came up with that name. And this is something Disney has started doing in the parks recently with Talking Mickey and things like that. This all started back with this series, was the first time they attempted something like this. And it reminds me, like Teddy Ruxpin to me looks exactly like Winnie the Pooh from the show.
Yeah, he does. You're right. Yeah.
It's kind of the same type of thing. The movement of the face and everything reminds me a lot of that. But this was basically set up as kind of the same format as the cartoons, because the opening of the show would have a narrator, and he would open a book and the characters would be part of the book, which is kind of how they framed the cartoon shorts of Winnie the Pooh and whatnot. And as the story went along, the narrator interjected here and there throughout the story. And again, that's how the original cartoons were done as well. And the narrator had like a English accent, and he sounded a lot like Sebastian Cabot, who was the original narrator from the cartoons. Another interesting thing is the Sherman Brothers wrote a lot of original songs for this series, believe it or not. One of the songs, called The Right Side of the Bed, was originally written for Mary Poppins, and they recycled it for this series.
Oh. People say you got up on the right side of the bed when you're chirpy and cheerful. And people say you got up on the wrong side of the bed when you're grumpy or tearful. So it's up to you to start each day with a light and happy mood. The right side of the bed or the wrong side of the bed is a matter of your attitude. Some days the right side is the wrong side. Some days the left side is the wrong side. Those days your face is on the long side all day long. Some days the right side is the right side. Likewise, the left side is the right side. Because you're looking on the bright side all day long. The bright side is your friends and games and songs with happy tunes and ice cream cones and jelly beans and honey cakes and big balloons. So always think about the bright things. You'll find they are all the right things. You'll be on the right side, never on the wrong, all day long. Side is your friends and games and songs with happy tunes and ice cream cones and jelly beans and honey cakes and big balloons. So always think about the bright things. You'll find that they are all the right things. You'll be on the right side, never on the wrong, all day long.
And since then, this song has found its way into the Broadway version of Mary Poppins. So they brought it back for the new version. So this song has an interesting history to it. And they had original songs on every episode that followed the plot of whatever was going on that particular story. But at the end of each episode, they had a few segments after the story had ended, and they always had a rotation of recurring regular songs, and they made little music videos out of them that they showed at the end of the episodes. And The Right Side of the Bed was one of those. So it wasn't just a one-time song. It was a song they played often on the show. Another one I remember was the Eeyore song that they used to play a lot. I won't say no, I won't say can't, I won't say I won't try, I just say yes I can, 'cause a winner always tries. And it was Eeyore singing it.
When there's a hill I have to climb, although it seems too high, I hide my doubt and start right out, and here's the reason why. I won't say no, I won't say can't, I won't say I won't try. I just say yes I can, and I get there by and by. I just say yes I can, and I get there by and by. When something new looks hard to do, I'm not afraid to start. I just begin and lose or win. I try with all my heart. I won't say no, I won't say can't, I won't say I won't try. I just say yes I can, and I do it by and by. I just say yes I can, and I do it by and by. I won't say maybe, I won't say no, not I. I may be slow, but this I know, I'm not afraid to give it a try, give it a try, give it a great big try. So every time you seek a prize that seems too hard to win, the hardest part is how to start. Stop worrying, just begin. And don't say no, and don't say can't, and don't say I won't try. Just say yes I can, and you just might win that prize. Just say yes I can, 'cause a winner always tries.
Thanks for singing along with me.
And that was a Sherman Brothers song, too. I didn't know it at the time. I was watching these originally, that these were Sherman. I didn't find that out till years later. I was like, no wonder I liked all these songs.
Right.
Tigger had a song, You're the Only You, and I'm the Only Me. You know, they had all these regular songs at the end of the episodes that they played over and over and over again. And then they had like a little like how-to or educational little segment at the end. So it was basically 3 segments on each episode. They had the main story, and then it was followed by a music video of one of this rotation of songs. And then it ended with a little like skit where like they try to solve a puzzle or, you know, paint something or do something interesting that's somewhat educational for little kids. So yeah, that was a terrific show. And I mean, I was a little old for it because when Disney Channel launched, I was 9, and this is probably more geared towards 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Mm-hmm. But because I was just such a Pooh fan and just a Disney fan, I watched it anyway. And I watched it probably till I was like 14 years old. So yeah, that show has good memories for me.
Yeah. Who doesn't love Pooh? The next one's called Wish Upon a Star, and this was a series where children sent in their wishes, and the show would actually grant them the wishes.
Yeah, I remember watching this show. It was only shown once a week, I think on Saturdays. Same with, it was shown, Contraption was a weekly series, once a week, and this show was a weekly series, and I think they were shown back to back on Saturday mornings. So I would watch this after Contraption, and they would just like, there'd be a little girl who wished she could be a ballerina, so they would take her to the New York Ballet, and she got to meet, you know, the professional ballerinas, and they took her through a class and taught her things, and then they brought her on the stage and let her do a little routine, and you know, that type of thing. Or a kid that wished he could be a lion tamer, and they brought him to the circus and taught him how to be a lion tamer and all that stuff. So yeah, it was fun, it was cute. I love the theme song. It's Academy Award winning theme song.
Right. And the last series that we have for 1983 is called You and Me, Kid.
Oh, goodness.
And this show was hosted by Sonny Melendrez.
Hello, I'm Sonny Melendrez.
And it was basically like parents and their children doing different activities together. They would be exercising, they would be acting out different things.
Pantomiming.
Doing like imaginative type of activities together. And
yeah.
So I don't really know who this was for, but
I think this was for very young kids. I did watch it because it was sandwiched in between shows I did like, I mean, it's not that I hated the show, it just I wasn't the audience for it. I was a little too old for this, but I still watched it because it came on after Good Morning Mickey and before Mousercise, so it was always like sandwiched in between two shows I did want to see, and I always ended up watching it. It was, one thing I remember is Famous and a Half. They did like a segment, they like went out of the studio and they filmed a celebrity and like their grandkid. And they talked about how, their relationship together. And it was usually a famous person, like Kurt Russell and his kid or something, somebody like that. Annette Funicello and her daughter or something. And it was called Famous and a Half. That was always interesting. The rest of the show was just basically very, toddlers and their adult parents just playing games together. And they did different scenarios where like, okay, you're going to bake a pie and you're going to feed it to your mom and she's going to get really full. So they would just kind of pretend to do that with no props. It was all pantomime. And the theme song was probably the best part of the show.
Just you and me, kid, we're quite a pair. Just stick with me, kid. Think of the fun we'll share. We'll have the best time you ever saw two people have together, gee, kid. That's you and me. Yes, you and me. You and me.
Hello, I'm Sonny Melendrez. Welcome to You and Me, Kid.
So that ends 1983, and now we're on to 1984.
So we should mention that these shows didn't, some of them ended in 83, but most of them carried over. So they didn't add a lot of new shows in the years to follow because a lot of the 83 shows were still running.
Right. But in 1984, one of the series that they added was called Big Bands at Disneyland.
Oh, yes.
And now, from Plaza Gardens, deep in the heart of Disneyland, in Anaheim, California, we present Big Bands at Disneyland. A celebration of big band music featuring the best of the big bands in concert.
And this is where they had actual big bands playing at Disneyland in Plaza Gardens. And I watched an awesome, amazing episode with Cab Calloway, and it was so cool. I wish I would have been able to watch this back in 1984.
Yeah, and most of these are on YouTube, so you can go and watch the episodes. It was Peter Marshall, who was also the host of the original Hollywood Squares, was the host of this show. And it was basically just a typical night at Plaza Gardens, stuff you would see when they weren't filming it for TV. But they decided to, because it was so amazing, some genius came up with the idea of let's film this for the Disney Channel. And they did, and when they did that, they got even some bigger names than they normally would have. But a lot of the names that were there during the series were there regularly, even when they weren't filming for TV. So it was kind of a combination of both. And it was a very short-lived series, and it's kind of sad. I would have liked to have seen this go on because there's a lot of other famous bands that didn't get represented in this series. Because each episode focused on a different band. There's a lot of other famous bands that did perform in Disneyland often that weren't featured because the show only lasted, I think, 10, 11 episodes. I loved this show because
Yeah.
this is my kind of music, and it was fantastic to see the actual, like, Cab Calloway himself performing, all the Artie Shaw, all the famous big band leaders. They were still around in the early 80s. That's when they started passing away. It was around that time. So this was one last moment in the spotlight for a lot of these famous performers, and it's good that it was captured for posterity.
Definitely.
It's also good to see the original Plaza Gardens and all that, because it was just a famous venue.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of famous people have performed there over the years.
Yeah, I liked too that Peter Marshall gave a little bit of a kind of a history lesson on Cab Calloway. So
yeah, they did that on every episode. They cut away and do kind of a little photo montage and talk about the history. And then they usually did an interview as another segment of the show.
Yeah, so I think that goes a little bit deeper into the music rather than just watching them play live. But I mean, I wish I could have seen this. This is right up my alley too. So
well, the good news is you can watch most of them on YouTube.
Yeah, I will definitely be checking that out.
The other good news is I'm going to eventually be adding a lot of the audio from these programs onto my website. So
awesome.
Look for that too.
The next series is another one that I'm definitely going to be checking out, and it's called Disney Family Album. This was a series that kind of focused on, some of the more popular people in the Disney company and kind of went into, like a little half-hour show about their life.
Yeah.
And the one that I watched was about Annette Funicello.
Right.
Who I absolutely love.
Basically, the Disney legends were covered on this.
Yeah.
Like famous people who contributed to the Disney legacy.
The one that I watched about Annette was amazing because I learned new stuff about her that I didn't know before just by watching this show from 1984. So,
yeah, and it was like when she was still, healthy. And,
right.
And still the Annette we all love,
Yep.
And they really, there's so many great Disney legends that were covered on this series. There were 20 episodes. And they included Ward Kimball, Peter Ellenshaw, Mark Davis, Jimmy McDonald. I mean, Buddy Ebsen was actually the narrator of the series. And on one of the episodes, he was featured on it. Him and Fess Parker were the featured topic. And he was narrating his own biography.
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, and then a couple of episodes, which I think were the best ones, were ones where they kind of covered more than just one person. There was one where they did Disney voices, and they talked about a lot of the famous people who provided voices for the Disney cartoons. And there was one called Imagineers, where they talked about a lot of the different Imagineers, and they interviewed them, because they were all still around back then. Mm-hmm. So it's really amazing to be able to see all of these famous people, and this is all brand new footage. It was all filmed for the series. And the thing that's interesting is a lot of times when Disney today is doing some sort of a documentary or something where they're talking about a lot of these people who have passed on, they use clips from the series to feature for different things when they're creating new documentaries about these different famous people. So yeah, this was amazing, and I watched this when I was little, when it was, because I didn't have the internet, I wasn't reading a lot. This was all brand new information for me when I was a kid, and this show really sealed the deal in a lot of ways for me to become a lifelong Disney fan, because it really introduced me to a lot of these people and a lot of these ideas and things in such a way that I had never been exposed to before as an 11-year-old little boy. So, this show and shows like it that were shown on the Disney Channel were what really made me what I am today, I have to say. I mean, it's really interesting because I don't think about it a lot, but the early Disney Channel has had such an impact on my life today because this was my source of Disney information, entertainment. It was where it was all at. I didn't have a computer, and there was no internet, so this was my information about Disney. This is where it all came from, and this is why I am as big a Disney fan as I am today. And this specific series has a lot to do with that, so...
Yeah, I mean, this is probably where you first heard the name Mark Davis.
It is. It absolutely is. So, I mean, what more can I say?
Right. Well, the next series is called DTV. This was kind of like a play on MTV where they took kind of popular 80s songs and they put clips of different Disney cartoons together, kind of like Mickey and Minnie dancing and then Donald and Daisy dancing, and they put them to these popular songs from the 80s.
Right. None of the animation was original. It was all drawn from their library of 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s theatrical cartoons, and they repackaged them and set them to popular songs. But I have to say that most of the songs were older than they did have some 80s songs. I remember Private Eyes, They're Watching You. That was
I remember
one
a
of them.
Huey Lewis one too.
Yeah, there were definitely 80s songs, but a lot of them were 50s, 60s songs. I remember like Tutti Frutti on Rudy was one, and Hound Dog, and a lot of those kind of songs. I know Pineapple Princess, they did one for that too, the Annette
Not
song.
seen that one.
Yeah, so I loved this. I thought it was so clever and cute how they did this. They just basically made Disney versions of music videos, which were hugely popular in that time. So it was just Disney's take. So basically, this was not like a half-hour show, generally. Sometimes it was, but what they would do is when they had a movie that wasn't quite... They wanted to start the next show on the hour or on the half hour. They didn't want to start a brand new show at 11:27. They wanted to start it at 12 o'clock.
Right.
So they would show one of these songs as filler between the shows so that it would line up the next program to start on the hour or the half hour. So sometimes they would show a half-hour version of DTV, but not very often. Usually they'd show one or two as fill-in for the time slot, because they didn't have commercials. So when they showed a movie, they'd show the full movie without any interruptions, and movies aren't like always lined up to be exactly on the hour or on the half hour. A movie might be an hour and 45 minutes long. You got 15 minutes to fill before... So that's what they would use these for. They did that sometimes with Masterpiece Theater, too. They would cut up the show and just show one segment and use that as a filler. So, in the earlier years, they did show DTV more often as a half-hour thing, but that was very short-lived. Eventually, they just cut out the different songs and showed them individually to fill in time.
Yeah, I know this was really popular. I remember seeing some of these when I was younger. Now, it wasn't on the Disney Channel, though.
Right. They did produce a couple videos that you could rent. And then they did show it a couple times as like a special on network TV, like a one-time special. Like I think they did a love songs one for Valentine's that they showed on regular TV, and then they ended up releasing it on home video. So that's probably how you were exposed to it.
Right. But I did like these a lot. They were fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next series is called The Edison Twins. And this was about twins Tom and Annie, and they use science to help them solve mysteries.
Yes. This show is such a guilty pleasure because it's so stupid, but I loved it as a kid. Now, this was not original. This was a Canadian children's program that Disney aired on the Disney Channel, and it was, for American kids to see. But I think it was like a public television show on Canadian TV. Like 3, 2, 1 Contact. This was kind of like that, or like the Bloodhound Gang used to be shown on PBS, where they would solve crimes using math. Remember that?
Yes.
So I mean, like, this was the same kind of idea on Canadian TV. So Disney bought the rights to air it on American TV. So it wasn't a Disney Channel original, but it definitely was to an American audience. It was Disney Channel was the venue for this program. And the theme song is awesome, first of all.
Just kids trying to do what they should. They're growing up in the neighborhood, or up the street and around the bend. They're called the Edison Twins. Now every day is a different trial, but they pull through with a lot of style. Always getting out of trouble if they get in. Like with the Edison Twins. And if you use your head, you'll always win. You know the Edison Twins. Oh no, 2 days are quite the same. Life is just a learning game. And if you use your head, you'll always win. Just like the Edison Twins.
It's like one of those songs that just gets stuck in your head. Like, I remember as a kid, I'd be like singing this at school, and like it just gets stuck in your head. It's crazy. But I really just enjoyed the kids my age doing smart things and solving crimes and using innovative. It was just, I don't know. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next one is called Enchanted Musical Playhouse, and this is a title for a series of musicals that were based on popular fairy tales.
Yes.
And there was 4 episodes, so 4 different musicals, and it was like live stage musicals that they actually performed.
Yeah,
And-
these were expensive to produce. And they were very high production, so that's why there were only 4 of them.
Right.
So 2 of them, The Steadfast Tin Soldier and The Velveteen Rabbit, those 2, they were directed by Robert Sherman's son, and he wrote songs for this. Not Robert Sherman, but his son. He wrote original songs for the first 2. And Richard and Robert Sherman wrote one song, a title song for each of them. So, I mean, we're talking big deal. Like, these were original music by Shermans, basically.
To a gingerbread star. 'Cause if you believe in make-believe, no faraway dream is too far. Pretend you can climb up a rainbow. You'll find there's a beautiful view. 'Cause if you believe in make-believe, your happiest wishes come true.
Pretend you set sail on a movie.
You'll fly to a gingerbread star. 'Cause if you believe in make-believe, no faraway dream, faraway dream is too far.
So, the second two weren't involving the Shermans, but they were equally as impressive. I do remember I don't remember watching all of them when they were new, but I definitely remember watching the Ferdinand the Bull one, and that was really, really good, and I enjoyed that a lot. This reminds me a lot of the Shelley Duvall series that she had on HBO, which was kind of the same concept where she took fairy tales and reinterpreted them. But these kind of were more played straight, but the production of it and the look of it reminds me a lot of that earlier Shelley Duvall program from HBO, and I think it might have been influenced by that. In fact, I thought until I looked into this deeper, doing the research, I actually thought it was Shelley Duvall that did this series, but no, that is not the case. But, I mean, at the time when I was watching it as a kid, I didn't make the distinction between the two. I thought these were part of the same series, but she decided to move it over to the Disney Channel for some reason. Because it really reminds me a lot of that earlier Shelley Duvall thing. I just thought I'd put that out there, because that was my first impression of this. But yeah, these were really, all four of them are available on YouTube. And they're very well done, and they definitely stand the test of time, and they've got some great music in them, too, so you should check them out.
So the next show, it's actually two of them I'm going to clump together, because they're Steve Allen's Comedy Room and Steve Allen's Music Room. And while they're two different series, it's still kind of the same type of show. So
and they're in the same set too.
Right. So Steve Allen is sitting down with comedians, or he's sitting down with popular musicians. And the announcer for both shows was Bill Maher.
Yeah.
And the musical accompaniment was the Terry Gibbs Band.
Right. And what's really interesting about the music version of it is they would be sitting down at a piano, and Steve Allen would be at the keyboard, and the guest would be like on the other side of the piano. And as he was interviewing them, he'd be like playing the piano. It's really weird. But they had like some amazing guests on the show. Now, for those who don't know, Steve Allen was the host of the original Tonight Show in the early 50s, before Jack Parr, before Johnny Carson. He was the first. And he invented the format of the late night talk show that is still being used to this day, with the couch and the desk and that whole setup. That was his creation. And he was always he was just a fantastic interviewer. So he just has had a way with the way he talked to people, and it was just, he just brought out the best in people as an interviewer. I feel he's a very underrated person as far as that goes, because when you think of all-time greatest interviewers, you think of Johnny Carson or David Letterman. He was definitely up there with them as far as that capability. But yeah, these were very good shows.
Some of the guests include Shelley Berman, Red Buttons, George Gobel, Louis Nye, Jack Carter, Dick Shawn, Shecky Green, Mort Stahl, and Sid Caesar.
Yeah, and who were some of the guests on the musical version?
Well, the one I watched was Lou Rawls and Rosemary Clooney, and that was awesome.
Yeah, Yeah, so that's the caliber of guests he would have. And that was on very short-lived, but I remember watching that and I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so the last series of 1984 that was added to the Disney Channel is called Still the Beaver. And it was obviously a revival of the original 50s show Leave It to Beaver with the same original cast members, and now they're all grown up and they have families and kids of their own.
Right, so before there was Roseanne,
right,
the Roseanne revival, there was Still the Beaver. And I guess this was a made-for-TV movie a couple years earlier that did very well, and so Disney decided to produce it as a series, and then after it ran on the Disney Channel, I think for 1 year, it was picked up by TBS, Turner Broadcasting Station, and they aired it on there for several more years. But it
was
originated.
Called, New Leave It to Beaver.
The New Leave It to Beaver, but it was, obviously the same cast. The only missing person was the father, because he had passed away before they produced the series. Hugh Beaumont.
Ward,
yeah. He had passed away by the time this revival came out. But the original mother, Barbara Billingsley, June Cleaver, she was in it. And Eddie Haskell and the Beav and Wally, they were all in it. And they had kids, and the funny thing is, Eddie Haskell's kid was like the bad seed, like Eddie Haskell had been, but it was like the bad seed kid for the younger generation.
Of course.
Like father, like son, yeah.
Yes, as annoying as Eddie.
And I think Eddie was like a repo man or a used car salesman or something very fitting, a very fitting career for someone like him.
Of course.
And Beaver was unmarried and lived at home, of course.
Oh, poor Beav.
And Wally was married to a beautiful blonde woman and lived next door to... And it was the same house, too, which was funny.
Yeah.
That they showed... Because I've seen that house. It's actually... I don't know if it's still there, but it was on the Universal lot in California. And when you went on the Universal Studios tour, they would drive you by that house and say, this is the Beaver's house. Mm-hmm. So it was still there when they filmed this, so they used it. And then they used the house they had built next door to represent Wally's house, which was kind of funny. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was cute. I enjoyed it.
So now on to 1985. The first new series that they introduced for the Disney Channel was called Danger Bay. And this was an adventure series featuring a family living on a small island, and the father was like a veterinarian.
Right. I didn't really watch this. It didn't interest me, but I remember it was a lot of boats and seemed like Coast Guard rescue and just different things happening on the ocean and saving dolphins, and I just wasn't into that type of thing when I was that age, so I'm probably still not that much into it, but I remember it. It was very 80s. The theme song is very it reminds me of the Magnum P.I. theme song or something. It's just very they take it so seriously. It's the electric guitars are like
like they're fighting crime.
Yeah. I wasn't that into it, but I was on a couple years. It kind of makes me feel like the show Baywatch kind of was informed by the show, because it has a lot of the same type of things happening, but more on a G-rated level. But yeah, this show and Baywatch really remind me of each other for some strange reason.
Huh. Interesting.
A lot of like lifeguard rescues and things like that.
And the last new series for 1985, I know you remember, and it's Dumbo's Circus.
Yes.
And this one was similar to the Winnie the Pooh show, where it was also like the puppeteers and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Dumbo Circus, flying out of the sky. You'll never see another show like this. Dumbo Circus, to see an elephant fly is something that you really shouldn't miss. Dumbo Circus, flying from town to town. Now here's the part that's too good to be true. Dumbo Circus is coming to visit you.
With thrills and chills and daring do.
And lots of great adventures too.
There will be music
and magic.
I hope you can come. There'll be a few surprises, and we'll have lots of fun.
Dumbo Circus, flying from town to town. Now here's the part that's too good to be true. Dumbo Circus is coming to visit. You won't want to miss it. Coming to visit you.
What was different about this one is that Dumbo was the only character from the movie. All the other characters were original to the series. They were circus characters, but they weren't in the Disney movie. They were created just for the series. And the other thing that was kind of creepy about it is all of the people that were like the audience or different people that they interacted with in the show were little puppets that kind of looked like a slightly less charming looking version of like the Muppets, where they have those Muppets that are just like generic Muppets, where they change their hair or their eyes or their nose, and they just have like a plain looking face. It's different colors and stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
These were kind of the same design, but not as cute, kind of more creepy looking than the Jim Henson version. And they represented the audience and different people they interacted with in the different storylines. There was no host like on Pooh Corner. There was no like narrator either. But like Pooh Corner, they had a roster of recurring songs that they played at the end of each story. And then they had like a edutainment little skit after that. So it's kind of the same setup as Pooh Corner, as far as having the main story, then a song, then a little skit at the end. And they added a new character, I think in the second or third, maybe the second season. He wasn't part of the first season, called Fair Dinkum. And he was a koala bear from Australia, obviously. But yeah, I remember all the characters. They had Lily, who is the trapeze artist cat. She was a cat. They had another cat, like the lazy guy, and he was usually kind of not like a villain, but he kind of serves sort of as a villain of sorts. But he was like the handyman of the circus. They had Lionel, who was the ringmaster, and he was, guess what animal he was, Ruth?
Was he a lion?
Yes.
How did I guess?
And then they had a monkey, an orangutan, but he had really long arms, and he was kind of creepy looking. And he was stupid. Like they made him a dimwit character. He's kind of clueless. But yeah, this was a really fun show. I love the music. And I was, again, too old to be watching this, but because it was Disney, I watched it anyway.
All right, so now we're on to 1986. And the first show that they added was called Kids Incorporated.
Everybody look around, hear the sounds, something special's gonna come your way. We got something that is new, that is true. We got something there for you today. All around the nation, whoa, with a new sensation. Have you heard? Have you heard? Have you heard? Kids Incorporated, K-I-D-S. Whoa, looks like we made it. Kids Incorporated.
And I actually did watch this show because it was originally syndicated on regular channels.
Right.
And then it moved over to the Disney Channel. And
Right.
this was 5 members of a young rock group that performed at the Palace, the local club. And then, so they would perform a couple songs during the episodes, and then they would have like whatever was going on that week. Somebody was having an issue that they dealt with and things like that. But
Right.
I absolutely loved this show. I loved all the music. Martika was the main female singer, and I love her. I still love her to this day. She has an amazing voice.
All I remember from the show is big hair.
Yep.
Shoulder pads, huge belts with huge buckles. What do you call those? Those stirrup pants?
Yep.
Big, giant shirts with shoulder pads.
Yes. Long shirts that were like a dress. Yes.
Yeah, a lot of those haircuts that guys had back then.
Oh, like a mullet?
A lot of mullets. Yeah, a lot of like pink and turquoise prints.
Mm-hmm. Yes, bright colors everywhere.
Yeah.
Bright colors. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very, like, this is the definition of 80s.
Yes.
Like, if you look at 80s in the dictionary, this is the picture they would show as a picture of the show. Yeah. I wasn't into it because I was not a fan of the 80s, even when the 80s were happening. So, this wasn't a show that I really enjoyed. But
Well, I loved it. And then they added one other short-lived series. I guess it was kind of like a limited series called Disney's Return to Treasure Island. And this was 10 years after the events of the original movie Treasure Island.
Right. This was all filmed overseas with a British production company. And it was a mini-series. There were 10 episodes. Very, very well done. And I remember watching this and I enjoyed it, even as a kid. Because the reason I decided to give it a shot was because I had seen the original Treasure Island. And, I felt like this might be a continuation. And it is different than the 1950 version, but it's still very, very entertaining. And good acting. And lots of high seas adventure. Very enjoyable. So, recommended.
So that was it for 86. 87, they only added another limited series, which was A Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor. They did a couple of quick episodes because around this time he was toying with the idea of leaving the show. And
Yeah.
so they were promoting it on the Disney Channel. And A Prairie Home Companion is kind of like a Grand Ole Opry style variety show, featuring American folk music.
Right. It was a radio show.
Yeah.
And Disney brought it to TV for the first time. This was Disney trying out something new with it. And basically, they just filmed even though it was a radio show, they had an audience. So they decided, so they did have some stagecraft going on, even though it was a radio show. So Disney decided to just film it and air it. And they did it for, I think they might have done 4 installments of it. It wasn't like a regular weekly thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed it. I watched this and I thought it was hysterical. And this is how I was first introduced to Garrison Keillor. I'd never even heard of him before this. And I actually became a huge fan. And he was on the air for many years after this. I think he only retired maybe 10 years ago or something. Maybe even less time than that. But he was on the air for years and years and years. And it was just kind of, his gimmick was that he would just sit down in the middle of the show between all this other stuff going on. And he would just tell a story. And he would make up the whole story as he told it. It was all completely impromptu. But he just had this cast of characters that lived in this fictional town called Lake Wobegon. And he would just tell these stories reminiscent of the Andy Griffith Show. About just these old-fashioned, down-home type of people. The type of people you would see walking down Main Street, USA. Just very Americana. And he would just tell funny anecdotes about these types of people that lived in this fictional small town. And it was fascinating. And it was even more fascinating knowing that he would tell this fabulous story and he was making it up as he went along. So that was what was really interesting about it. Yeah, I love that. That was a great show.
Yeah. So now we're at 1988. There's just 2 more series that we're going to discuss, and the first one is called Good Morning Miss Bliss. And the pilot actually aired in 1987, but in 1988 it became a series starring one of my all-time Disney favorites, Hayley Mills. And she played an 8th grade teacher, and this show was basically about her, different experiences with the students and things like that, and interactions. Right. And it is also the precursor to the show Saved by the Bell.
Yeah. See, this iteration of the show focused on the adults more because Hayley Mills was really the star of the show. They had the same principal that ended up going to Saved by the Bell, but
Mr. Belding.
Mr. Belding. When Hayley left the show after 1 season, they reworked it and made it more of a focus on just the kids, and the adults were just side characters. And Mr. Belding was really the only regularly featured adult character on the show, and he was a sidekick, if anything. But a lot of the characters from that first season stayed on when it evolved into Saved by the Bell. Some of them left, and a couple new ones came on. Screech was there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Zach was there from the beginning.
Yep. And Lisa.
Lisa was there from the beginning. Kelly came on when it changed to Saved by the Bell. And what's the other boy?
AC Slater.
Slater came on, yeah. But this show, a lot of people don't know this. This show originated on the Disney Channel, and originally it was going to be a completely different show. And then it was picked up for Saturday morning TV, and it became the huge thing that it wound up being. Had Haley Mills known it was going to be such a big thing, she might have stayed on. But I was telling Ruth earlier that maybe it's a good thing that she left, because what the show kind of evolved into became kind of very corny and kitschy, and maybe Haley Mills didn't want to be affiliated with something like that.
Or maybe it wouldn't have been like that if she had been on it. So I don't know.
It might not have, she might have grounded it a little bit more, made it less wackadoodle like it became. You probably loved the show. I was never a fan. I liked it when Haley Mills was on it, but again, the whole 80s thing, I wasn't into it.
Yeah, I did love Saved by the Bell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a little bit older, too, so I was a little bit more cynical about it, probably.
Yeah. All right, and one more series that we want to discuss is the New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
Gotta get up, I gotta get going. I'm gonna see a friend of mine. He's round and he's fuzzy, I love him because he's just Pooh Bear, Winnie the Pooh Bear. Looking for fun, chasing some honeybees. Pooh Bear, I know he's out there. Rumbly tumbly, climbing a honey tree. But never ends for us, we're so adventurous. Feast every now and again. And when we're alone and there's nobody home, it's nice to be able to count on a friend like Pooh Bear, Winnie the Pooh Bear. Wherever you go, oh, won't you take me please, Pooh Bear, I gotta be there. It's me and it's you, my silly old Winnie the
Pooh. So this was a animated Winnie the Pooh series.
Yeah.
And just a little bit more kind of in the animation style of like the DuckTales and like Chip and Dale.
Right.
It kind of had a similar look to it.
Yeah, and this, unlike the live-action version, included Christopher Robin, and it was much more like the original cartoons. It wasn't like for preschoolers necessarily. It was more of just like, it was basically a continuation of the theatrical shorts and the different types of things that would happen in them. And this was on the Disney Channel for a season, and then it ended up on Saturday morning TV, and it was on TV, on regular Saturday morning TV, network TV, for years after it was first shown on the Disney Channel. This became a recurring thing where this was really the first example of it, but a lot of times they would launch these things on the Disney Channel for a season or for a few episodes to just kind of build up excitement for it, and then it would move over to first run syndication or network TV, depending on the situation. Another example of that is something we talked about in our last show, Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers. We're not talking about it on this episode because, even though I am talking about it, because it was 89, which was the next year, but they did show a movie of this in 88, so we should mention that. It was kind of the launching of it was a 2-hour version of Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, which eventually became the series. So that's another example of a series that they started on the Disney Channel. And another example is what we just talked about, Good Morning Miss Bliss, because that started on Disney Channel and then it moved over to network TV. So that's something they started doing right around this time.
All right, well, that concludes all of the series. Now we're going to move on to specials.
Yes. Well, one thing I want to say is a lot of these specials were shown annually because a lot of them were holiday-based. So they may have shown originally a lot of them in 83, but they came back like every year for years and years. So what are some of these specials, Ruth?
Well, starting in 1983, the first Disney Channel Christmas. And that's what it's called, a Disney Channel Christmas. And this was hosted by Jiminy Cricket, which they used a lot of the same scenes from the animated feature From All of Us to All of You, that holiday special there with Jiminy Cricket.
From 1959, the Walt Disney Presents, None of these compilation specials we're about to talk about included any original footage whatsoever. They all borrowed from earlier made-for-TV or theatrical things that Disney had produced and repackaged them, maybe added a new narrator at some points, but it was basically just a repackaging of all sorts of earlier content. This being one of the things, because all the things showing Jiminy Cricket were all from either Mickey's Christmas Carol or From All of Us to All of You, and they did do some voiceover, brand new voiceover using the actor who performs Jiminy Cricket, but there was no new animation at all.
They did take a look at Mickey's Christmas Carol, which had come out in 83.
Right, and he introduced that, but it was just you heard his voice. It wasn't, they didn't have any brand new animation. I mean, Mickey's Christmas Carol was brand new animation, but it wasn't created for
Disney Channel.
Special. Right, exactly.
Yeah. And the next special from 1983 is called A Disney Halloween.
Calling one and all tonight. It's hopping at the hall tonight. Dropping at the ball tonight. Disney's Halloween treat. Creatures on the prowl tonight. Features fair and foul tonight. They'll meet you there to howl tonight at Disney's Halloween treat. Black cats and bats and ghosts make most attractive hosts.
They're dying for a dance with you.
So play that haunting refrain. Tricks and treats to try tonight. We'll be riding high tonight. Your spirit's gonna fly tonight. Disney's Halloween treat. Disney's Halloween treat. It's a scream!
Right, so obviously we're not doing them in chronological order because Halloween comes before Christmas. But yeah, this was exactly the same idea as a Disney Channel Christmas. Again, this one borrowed a lot from a special that had just come out a couple years earlier called Disney's Halloween Treat, which aired on the network Disney program, which was canceled right before Disney Channel launched. So they borrowed a lot from that. They borrowed a lot from a Disney Salute to Villains, which had aired in the 70s on The Wonderful World of Disney with the Magic Mirror introducing everything. And, this was just all sorts of clips from Halloween or scary type, spooky type cartoons that Disney had produced over the years, with a segment on villains and a segment on... They borrowed a lot from the story of the Cat family. They borrowed, which was a 1950s episode of the Disney Anthology show, which was original animation from that. They took some of that and incorporated it. They just basically repackaged, just like the Christmas special. They repackaged, and these were like an hour and a half long. They were feature length. And yeah, they were presented as feature presentations, because whenever they showed like a feature length thing on the Disney Channel, they would go, and now a feature presentation.
And now, a Disney Channel feature presentation.
And this was considered a feature presentation, so yeah. And these showed, again, year after year after year on the Disney Channel. It was something always to look forward to as part of your annual holiday TV viewing.
Definitely.
And I recorded these on video, so I can still watch them. And I do. As part of my yearly rituals for these different holiday celebrations, I will revisit these. And it puts me in the holiday spirit.
Fun. On to 1984. There's a couple of specials we want to talk about. The first one is Donald's 50th birthday, which was obviously celebrating his birthday with different clips of his cartoons and film appearances.
Yeah, what's interesting is prior to this special, which aired originally on the Disney Channel, this type of thing would have been shown on regular network TV. Like when Mickey had his 50th birthday, it was an episode of The Wonderful World of Disney. But now that Disney didn't have a place to show this type of material, it was at this brief period in time, because in the later 80s, they kind of went back to network TV for these types of specials. But during this brief period of time, 83, 84, 85, these were being shown exclusively on the Disney Channel, and this birthday celebration was shown on the Disney Channel. What's interesting about this is they actually did a lot of brand new animation for this special. If you ever watch the 1978 Mickey's 50th anniversary special, there's a whole stop-motion animated segment on there where they show a man who's obsessed with Mickey Mouse, and all of these Mickey Mouse things in his home and in his office come to life and start dancing around to Baroque Hoedown. Well, they redid that for this Donald special, where they actually did the whole stop-motion thing, but now it's all Donald toys and things coming to life. Yeah. So this was actually a very big budget, heavily produced show. It wasn't just like a compilation of just Donald shorts. There was some of that, but a lot of it was original content, a lot of original animation. And a lot of the original animation they did for the show ended up being used for bumpers on the Disney Channel for years and years after. There's the bumpers where Donald Duck is opening a birthday present, and every time he opens the present, it's a different thing comes out of it. And like at one time there's a horse that kisses him, another time there's a dragon that breathes fire on him. That all came from this special, and it was incorporated into those bumpers later on. But so again, original animation. Dick Van Dyke hosted it. It was a big deal. It was not that's why I thought we should definitely mention it, because it wasn't like a Disney Channel Christmas and a Disney Halloween. This was more like they showed Donald Duck touring the country. It was all original footage. They showed the Donald Duck parade in Disneyland. It was a fitting tribute to Donald. It was well done. It was all original content. And so, unfortunately, this one is not on YouTube. You can only see a few clips of it. But I have seen the whole thing, and it is very, very good.
Yeah, and it also features that Donald's birthday song.
Yeah, happy, happy birthday to you. Yeah.
Happy birthday, it's Donald's birthday. Happy, happy birthday to you. Hey Donald, happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you.
Donald, we thank you for the joy that you bring. So have a great birthday. Now everyone sing.
Happy birthday, it's Donald's birthday. Happy, happy birthday to you.
Hey Donald,
happy birthday to you. Come on! Happy birthday, it's Donald. We're having a party. Happy birthday, Donald. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, it's Donald's birthday.
And the other special that we want to feature for 1984 was called From Disney with Love, and this was a special for Valentine's Day, and it focused on the Disney girls, the Disney female lead characters.
Right. So this was exactly the same format as the Halloween and Christmas, but this was the Valentine's Day version of it. And so again, they just took all pre-existing material out of the vault and repackaged it together. I remember one thing they incorporated was the song Disney Girls, which was a Beach Boys song from the 70s, which is actually kind of an homage to Disney that they wrote outside of Disney called Disney Girls, and they incorporated it into this special, which was fun.
Well, our love letters have been delivered, and we're glad you were here to receive them, because they truly were sent your way from Disney with love.
Clearing skies and drying eyes, now I see your smile.
Darkness goes and softness shows a change in style. Just in time, words that rhyme will bless your soul. Now I fill your hands with kisses and a Tootsie Roll. Reality, it's not for me, and it makes me laugh. But fantasy world and Disney girls, I'm coming back.
So on to 1985, we're starting again with a Christmas special. It's called A Magic Kingdom Yuletide Special. And this was kind of more of like a live action. It featured the kids of the kingdom and different Disney characters, including Scrooge McDuck, who complains that he doesn't like Christmas. So they're kind of trying to get him into the Christmas mood.
Right, so this started a trend that I thought was worth mentioning, how they would take a live stage show shown in the parks and they would turn it into a television special for the Disney Channel. This show was actually verbatim a live show, stage show at Disneyland at the Space Stage. You know, when Space Mountain, before it was an indoor theater, was the Space Stage. So this was a Christmas show you could watch at the park live with the kids of the kingdom and all the same characters, same music, basically exactly the same show. But they kind of upped the production value a little bit, filmed it in a studio, and created it as a television special. So I just thought that was interesting, because they did this a few more times following this. This is the first of a few times they did this type of thing.
So the next special was called Michael Iceberg in Concert from Disneyland. And this is an evening performance at the Tomorrowland Terrace in Disneyland. And it features Michael Iceberg, and he is best known for his synthesized music, the Iceberg Machine.
Right, so I thought this was a notable thing to mention. We're not bringing up every single special that Disney aired, because there's hundreds of them. But I'm bringing up ones that are more historically significant. And I feel this one is because Michael Iceberg was mainly a Walt Disney World performer. He performed live at their version of the Tomorrowland Terrace, which today is known as Cosmic Rays Starlight Cafe. And actually, he performed on the same stage where Sunny Eclipse now performs.
Oh, he predates Sunny Eclipse then.
Oh, yes. Sunny Eclipse didn't come along till the mid-90s.
Ah.
He was performing at this stage in the 70s and 80s. So he was a pioneer of synthesizer performing. I mean, this was the early... When you watch it today, you're like, what's the big deal? But back then, this was a very big deal because people had never seen a synthesizer before, and this was their first exposure to this type of music. And for many people, it was the first time they ever heard a synthesizer. So it was a big deal, especially in the 70s. But he was just a very charismatic fellow, and he wrote a lot of original songs too. And he was kind of a staple of the Disney parks during that period. So it's really nice that they did the special, because it really creates a time capsule of the type of entertainment that he provided. Because I have a record album of this same show, but when he performed at Walt Disney World, and it's very close to this live show, this filmed version. So it's basically the same type of show that he was doing live at Disney World, only it was kind of filmed again for posterity. So it's nice to have that as our record of that time in the parks.
Yeah, and I feel like this synthesized music really defines the 80s too.
Yeah, it does.
So.
And he did a lot of crazy sound effects, like
right.
You go, and now pigs in A, cows in B flat, moo. No, he was crazy.
Yeah,
he was a crazy guy.
It is fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last special for 1985 is called Too Smart for Strangers. And this features the cast of Welcome to Pooh Corner. And they're just focusing on it's basically a giant PSA about don't talk to strangers. The thing about this is I actually remember watching this because I watched this at school.
Yeah, it was on video. They released this also on VHS, so I'm sure they showed it in schools.
Yeah.
This was notable because it was kind of ahead of its time, and it talked about very controversial things, using Disney characters, don't talk to strangers, don't let a stranger touch you, those types of things that, children, unfortunately, need to know, and
right.
This is probably the best way to teach them these things with characters that they endear and that, they'll bring the message to them a little bit softer and, a little bit more where they can, take it, because it's a lot to swallow for a little kid. So I thought we should mention it because it was an important thing that Disney did.
Yeah. I mean, stranger danger was huge in the 80s. Like, it wasn't just coming from Winnie the Pooh. I remember, like, from all over, people were just like...
Oh, yeah. All of the sitcoms, like Different Strokes did an episode on it, and yeah, all of them did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of the things about this special is, so it opens up with Pooh singing this song that I remember to this day. I have not watched this since 1980s, and I watched it, and I was singing the song.
Oh my darling. Too smart for strangers, that's me, Winnie the Pooh. I'm a bear who takes care everywhere, and so should you be. Too smart for strangers, be smart, be quick, be strong, and watch out for dangers when strangers come along. Hello, my name is Winnie the Pooh, as you probably already know. Since we've been friends so long, you see, I know you and you know me. But a stranger is, oh bother, not like your mom or father. A stranger's someone you don't know, and you must be careful, so be too smart for strangers like me, Winnie the Pooh. I'm a bear who takes care everywhere, and so should you. Be too smart for strangers, be smart, be quick, be strong, and watch out for dangers when strangers come along.
I remember the words, so it's a very catchy theme song.
Yeah. And that's how I felt about, because I watched the series regularly, and all the songs did that to me.
Right. They're all earworms.
Yeah.
All right, so 1986, we have one special that we're going to bring up, and it was called The New Vaudevillians, and it was hosted by Peter Scolari, And it was basically like a variety show with different people doing different kind of semi-circus activities and things.
Juggling and magic tricks.
Yeah.
Basically, the type of acts that would have been in a vaudeville show when vaudeville was, new, like dog acts and magic acts and juggling and sword swallowing and all those types of crazy things. But I thought we should mention this is because it was very popular, and it was so popular that they actually had a part 2 and a part 3 of it. So, yeah, and I remember watching it, and I thought it was terrific. And the other thing that was interesting about it is they took bits from the show and created bumpers, again, to fill in time like they had done with DTV and Masterpiece Theater. They would take little snippets from the show and use it to fill in the gaps when like a movie ended but it wasn't quite on the hour or the half hour. So a lot of these little acts got recycled over and over again. Oh, and I remember they had a lot of ventriloquist acts, too.
Gotta love those puppets. All right, so now we're on to 1987. A couple of specials that we wanted to highlight is the first one, A Candlelight Christmas Ceremony. And this was taped at Disneyland, and it's the annual holiday candlelight ceremony that they do every year for Christmas.
What's really nice about this is, again, like that Magic Kingdom Yuletide special, this captures an actual live show that performed in the parks for posterity, all filmed professionally and packaged together professionally so that we can see what, if you've never seen the candlelight ceremony, you can watch this and get a really good idea of what it is and what it's like. So it's really nice to have these specials like this.
Yeah, and I don't think it's changed either.
It hasn't. Very little. I mean, it's basically exactly the same, so.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, you gotta check it out.
Yeah.
All right, the next one is called The Making of Disney's Captain EO. And this is obviously focusing on the 3D movie that was made in 1986 featuring Michael Jackson. And it was an attraction at Disneyland and also Epcot. And this is different than... So when you would wait outside of the show before you actually went into the theater, they would show a little making clip, but this is not the same thing.
Right. No, this is, I think is it an hour-long special?
And it was hosted by Whoopi Goldberg.
Right. And this was part of, I don't remember the specific details, but this was part of Michael Jackson's contract with Disney was to include this special, and that was how they justified putting so much money into the actual movie itself, is because they were also creating this hour-long documentary. So there was some reason they had to create this for financial reasons, because they were having trouble justifying making a 18-minute film for $100 million. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I'm guesstimating. But for some reason, this special was part of the justification of them putting that much money into it. And I remember hearing the whole story, but unfortunately, if any of our listeners remember the whole story, remind me, send me a message, and we'll read it on the next episode. But I just thought I should mention it because there was a whole contractual thing that this special involved, and it was not the average Disney Channel special. It was very high production and more than the average, because they had a lot of making of type specials over the years on the Disney Channel, and this one kind of stands out because it was all done on film, not videotaped. It was like a really high produced documentary almost of it. So
right. I'm glad they have it because Captain EO is amazing, and it's good to see how they actually made it too. So
yeah.
All right, so the last special for 1987 is called Snow White Singin', Dancin', Hi-Ho. And this was a live action stage show at Disneyland.
Right, it was a one of the very first shows they showed at the new Videopolis stage next to It's a Small World. And it was basically just a half-hour condensed version of the story of Snow White with all the songs from the film. A couple original songs, too. And, yeah, it was just... Basically, they took a camera, held it in front of the stage, and filmed the actual live show. So again, like that Yuletide special, they're just showing a live theme park production on the Disney Channel. But what's different for this one is they didn't film it in a studio. They actually filmed it at Disneyland on the actual stage where it was produced.
All right, and then we have one special that we wanted to talk about for 1988, and it's called A Conversation with Carol Burnett. And that's exactly what it was. It was Carol Burnett on a stage and answering questions from the audience and just talking about her career.
Right, so the reason I thought we should mention this is because it led to a whole series of A Conversation With, which this was the only one from 88, and we're only talking about 88, but like the following year there were several more. I think there was A Conversation with Betty White, A Conversation with George Burns, and a couple others.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of led to kind of a series, so I thought we should bring it up. The other thing is that this was something that Carol did on her show. She would walk out at the beginning of the Carol Burnett show and answer questions from the audience. And they always incorporated that as the opening to her program every week. So this was kind of a continuation of that. She had no script, she had no planned agenda. She just walked out and she had a conversation with the audience. She took questions and, of course they asked her to do the Tarzan yell. I mean, because that's a given, that they're going to do that. So it was basically a continuation of what she had been doing on her television show, just kind of an extended version of it. I remember watching it. It was very entertaining. And I think I saw the Betty White and the George Burns one, too. And there were a couple others. I don't remember who else did it, but...
There was one for Bob Hope.
Oh, yeah, I did see that one. Yeah, so that's why I thought we should mention it.
All right, so that ends the specials. Now we just have films to talk about.
Right. So in closing, we want to just kind of give an honorable mention to some of the more notable original films that were produced for the Disney Channel between 1983 and 1988. Ruth, you want to kind of give a list? This is kind of our list of recommended films you should seek out, kind of the best of. There are others, but these are kind of the best ones.
Yeah, so it actually starts in 1984. We have two movies that we recommend, and the first one is called Love Leads the Way, and it's kind of about a blind guy who he uses the first seeing eye dog and the experiences there. And the next one is called Tiger Town, and this is actually the first Disney Channel movie ever made. And this is it's a baseball movie about the Detroit Tigers and them winning the World Series. For 1985, we have Black Arrow, which this is kind of like a period piece, kind of along the lines of like a Robin Hood kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's a Robert Louis Stevenson novel, and it featured around the War of the Roses from the Middle Ages.
And the next one is called The Blue Yonder, and this is kind of about
time machine.
Yeah, a time machine, and also the history of flying and things like that.
Yeah,
so
he goes back to the 20s and like experiences the early days of flying,
right,
airplane travel. Yeah.
The next one is called Lots of Luck, and this stars a Jiminy Cricket's favorite, Annette Funicello.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really cute movie and about a family who wins the lottery.
Yeah, and all the problems. Be careful what you wish for, kind of a movie.
Right.
It's a comedy.
Yeah, but it's fun. And then the last one for 1985 is called The Undergrads, and this stars Art Carney, and he's like an older gentleman who decides to go back to college along with his grandson. And they live together and stuff like that, so it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I always think when Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield came out, I always thought like they ripped off this movie because this came before that one. It's kind of the exact same plot.
Right, yeah. For 1986, we have one really good movie, which is Parent Trap 2. It's Susan and Sharon are all grown up now, and they are starting families of their own, and you kind of get to see how they've been doing and what's going on in their lives.
Right. And I think there was a couple more.
There was definitely a lot more.
Yeah, Parent Trap 3, Parent Trap 4, Parent Trap 5, The Reckoning, Parent Trap 6, this time it's personal.
Parent Trap 7, 3D, you know? Right. So, but I love all those Parent Trap movies, so.
I think this is, besides the original, I think this is the best of the sequels.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
For 1987, we have Anne of Avonlea, which is the continuing story of Anne of Green Gables. This is the second movie following Anne of Green Gables, and this, if you like Anne of Green Gables, this is a must-watch. This is such a good movie. It's 4 hours long.
The original was not Disney Channel, but it aired on the Disney Channel, and it was so popular on the Disney Channel that Disney decided to produce the sequel. And it was a Disney Channel original. It was basically a 2-part miniseries.
Right, and it is so good. You have to watch it. It's so good.
Oh yeah, it's really, really. I'm not just, the acting, the characters. It's really phenomenal.
It is.
It's not to be missed.
Yeah. And another one for 1987 is called Not Quite Human. This is starring Alan Thicke, and he is a toy maker who builds a robot son.
Yes, and I remember a girl friend I had in high school had a huge crush on the actor that played, I forget his name, but he played the robot son.
Jay Underwood.
And he also played in The Boy Who Could Fly, I think. Yeah, she was crazy about him.
All right, for 1988, we have a couple of movies. The first one is A Friendship in Vienna.
Right, this centers around, there's a girl that's a Catholic girl, and there's a girl who's Jewish, and they get separated because of the Nazi thing going on, and it's a very sad movie, and it really doesn't have a very happy ending either. But it's based on a children's book called The Devil in Vienna. I'm glad they changed the name.
Right. That would be very misleading.
Yes.
The next one is called Goodbye, Miss 4th of July. And this is about a Greek family that moved to West Virginia in 1916. And just what they encounter, how
the discrimination they face and
right.
things like that, yeah.
And the American customs that seem confusing to them.
Right. And it's just kind of a interesting movie. Kind of reminds me of Anne of Avonlea, actually. It's that type of story, just like people at that time and the things that happen within a family situation.
One more for 1988 called Ollie Hop Noodle's Haven of Bliss. And this is actually a sequel to A Christmas Story.
Right. Now, the same actor, who's the actor that did the narrative?
Gene Shepard?
Gene Shepard. A lot of you will recognize him as the voice of the father in the Carousel of Progress at Walt Disney World. He was the narrator of the original Christmas Story film. He also narrated this film. He also wrote these films, and they're based on his own childhood. And so the characters in the sequel are the same characters that were in the original. They're different actors playing them. But it's Ralphie and the same mother, and But it's interesting that the sequel is not very well known, whereas the original is something everybody knows about. But I would say the original, the Christmas Story, is a lot better. Even though I do like this version, it's not quite the same because it's not the same actors, and the way the characters are portrayed in this sequel are a lot different than how they were portrayed in A Christmas Story. So But anyway, it's still fun because it's a period piece. It takes place in the 50s. Because they're a little bit older. The first one takes place like in the late 40s. But this one, Ralph is a teenager. So it's a little bit more into the 50s. But it's still, it's got that nostalgia going for it and everything. And you gotta love Gene Shepard's voice and the way he narrates things. That's always a pleasure. So, that is our look at the original Disney Channel. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed episode number 94 of Jiminy Crickets. And where can everybody find you on the web, Ruth?
I am the co-host of a podcast along with my daughter where we watch and discuss the Disney made-for-TV movies from the 80s called the Disney Sunday Movie Podcast. We've actually done a couple of episodes on the movies that we discussed. So I have one on the Blue Yonder and also the Undergrads. So you can go back and listen to those.
And you'll be covering some of the other ones that we mentioned in future episodes.
Yeah, because they made them for the Disney Channel and then they aired them on the Disney Sunday Movie.
Later.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Twitter, and Facebook. And our website is DisneySundayMoviePodcast.com. And I'm on Facebook. I'm Ruthie Brown.
You can find me on Facebook under Chris Linden. That's LYNDON, as in Lyndon Johnson. On Twitter, I'm DisneyChris73. And I have a website called DisneyChris.com, home of the Disneyland Magical Audio Tour. And I also have a YouTube channel also called DisneyChris.com, but it's spelled out DOTCOM. And on there, we post past episodes of Jiminy Crickets. Plus, I do a bi-weekly update of my Disneyland Magical Audio Tour. Ruth, where can everybody find Jiminy Crickets on the web?
You can find all of our past shows on our website at jcricketpodcast.blogspot.com. You can also listen to us on iTunes at Jiminy Crickets, that's with an exclamation point, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. You can also email us your comments or questions at jiminycricketspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And join our Facebook page, Jiminy Crickets, exclamation point, podcast.
And Ruth, do you have any final words for this week?
I do. I love doing this episode because I absolutely love the 80s, and you mix 80s and Disney together, and it's perfect for me. So thanks for letting me take this
radical trip.
Right, this awesome radical trip back in time to the 80s. I loved it. Thanks for listening.
Totally. And always let your conscience be your guide.
When your heart is in your dream, no request is too